What did you do to our colonies? Admiral Hayes inquired, leaning forward. Her coffee mug was suspended in mid-air, a holographic display flickering as her face aged momentarily. The Nexar bombardment was extensive, ma'am. New Sydney, Europa Base, and Ganymede Station are all gone. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez's voice faltered. Initial estimates indicate over 8 million casualties. The coffee mug touched down on the desk with a soft sound. The Admiral's expression remained perfectly impassive, which those familiar with her knew was a dire omen. And the Nexar representative's exact words were. Marcus hesitated. They stated, and I quote, "Your species' expansion beyond your solar system is considered excessive and a threat to galactic stability. This measured response should serve as a sufficient deterrent against further colonial ambitions." A smile, far from pleasant, appeared on the Admiral's face. They actually used the word measured, did they? Yes, ma'am. An interesting choice of words. She rose, straightening her uniform jacket. Tell me, Lieutenant, are you acquainted with Earth's military history, specifically the concept of sleeping dragons? I can't say that I am, ma'am. There's an old saying, often wrongly attributed to various figures, let sleeping dragons lie. The origin is less important than the meaning. Some forces are best left undisturbed. She walked to the window, gazing at the gleaming ships of the Terran Defense Fleet. The Nexar apparently skipped the chapter in their xenological studies. Ma'am, humanity has been playing nice, Lieutenant. We've been the good neighbors, the peaceful negotiators, the diplomatic solution seekers. Not because we're naturally inclined to be passive, oh no. She turned back, her eyes gleaming. We've been peaceful because we remember. We remember what we're capable of when pushed. The last time humans fought humans, we nearly reduced our own world to ashes. So, we chose peace, chose cooperation, chose to channel all that creative energy into exploration instead of exploitation. She tapped a command into her desk console, displaying a galactic map. The Nexar think they've taught us a lesson about overreach, about knowing our place. A harsh laugh escaped her. No, Lieutenant, what they've done is remind us of who we used to be, who we still are deep down when someone threatens our own. Admiral, are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Lieutenant. I'm stating a fact. The Nexar just poked a sleeping dragon with a very sharp stick. And now, she gestured to the fleet outside, they get to learn why every other spacefaring species gave Earth such a wide berth during first contact. Raxival, senior tactician of the Nexar containment fleet, was having what humans would describe as a very bad day. What do you mean they're not retreating? The tactician's sensory frills vibrated with agitation. The demonstration was perfectly calculated. The loss ratio should have triggered their species' survival instincts. Junior analyst Tech Mora's display tendrils drooped. The human response has been unexpected, honored one. Instead of withdrawing their colonial operations, they've launched what appears to be a full military mobilization. All human ships are being recalled to their home system, and their civilian vessels are being retrofitted with military-grade shields and weapon systems. That's not possible. The xenological profile clearly indicated they would seek diplomatic resolution when faced with overwhelming force. Their entire post-atomic society is built on avoiding large-scale conflict. Perhaps, a new voice interjected, we should have paid more attention to why they built their society that way. Both Nexar turned to face cultural specialist Zinder, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the command center. The specialist's research tendrils were coiled tightly, a sign of deep concern. Explain, Raxival demanded. Consider, honored one, that a species doesn't develop antimatter weapons, faster than light drives, and artificial gravity manipulation just for peaceful exploration. Every piece of human technology we've encountered has dual applications, civilian and military. They didn't stop being warriors, they just found other outlets for those impulses. Tech Mora's display tendrils rippled with confusion. But their responses to previous conflicts were choices. Zinder finished, conscious choices to seek peaceful solutions, not an indication of inability or unwillingness to fight. And now, the specialist's research tendrils unwound slightly, we've given them something they haven't had in centuries, moral clarity. absolute certainty that they are in the right. Historical records show that humans are never more dangerous than when they believe their cause is just. Zinder moved to the tactical display. And by attacking civilian colonies without warning or provocation, we've handed them the most righteous cause possible. A priority alert flashed across the command center screens. Tekmora's tendrils went completely pale. Honored One, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the Sol system. The humans, they're activating ships we never knew they had. Military vessels that weren't in any of our intelligence reports. Raxival's sensory frills fell flat against their skull. How many? Current count is over 3,000 ships of war, cruiser class or larger, and they're all bearing Nexar recognition codes. What? How do they have our codes? Zinder's research tendrils curled in what might have been amusement if the situation weren't so dire. Because, Honored One, humans are paranoid. They've been preparing for something like this since they first reached the stars. All that trade, all those diplomatic missions, they were studying us, learning our weaknesses, building ships specifically designed to counter our technology. But that would mean that this entire time, while we thought we were containing a potential threat, we were actually poking at a sleeping giant with a fully armed and operational war machine just waiting for an excuse. Zinder moved to the observation window, watching as emergency alerts began flooding in from Nexar border stations. And we just gave them the perfect excuse. Status report, Admiral Hayes barked, striding onto the bridge of the TDF Remembrance. The massive dreadnought, one of thousands that had been hiding in plain sight as civilian ships, hummed with power as its true military systems came online. All ships reporting ready, Admiral, Commander Anjali Patel responded crisply. Operation Wake Up Call is green across the board. The Nexar don't suspect a thing, they still think their jamming systems are working. Hayes allowed herself a small smirk. The Nexar were about to learn that humanity's primitive radio communications weren't a sign of technological inferiority, they were a backup system, carefully maintained for exactly this kind of situation. Very good. And are special delivery packages prepped and ready for deployment? Ma'am, though I have to say, Angeli hesitated, the Psychological Warfare Division really outdid themselves with this one. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, Commander. Hayes settled into her command chair. Humanity spent millennia perfecting the art of intimidation before we reached the stars. Might as well put all that experience to good use. She opened a channel to the fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. The Nexar thought they could teach humanity a lesson about staying in our place. Today, we're going to teach them one instead. Her voice hardened. They chose to attack civilian targets, our homes, our families, our children. They believed this would show us our weakness. Instead, they're about to learn why every other spacefaring race gives Earth a wide berth. The Admiral's fingers danced across her command console. All ships, execute jump sequence on my mark, and don't forget to broadcast the package on all frequencies. A predatory grin spread across her face. Let's show them what happens when you wake the dragons. Jump in 3, 2, 1, mark. The human fleet vanished in a cascade of quantum tunneling events, leaving behind only empty space and a broadcast message that was already racing across Nexar communication channels. We didn't build these ships because we wanted to fight. We built them because we remembered what we're capable of when we have to. You took 8 million lives to teach us a lesson about knowing our place in the galaxy. Now, we're going to teach you a lesson about humanity. Dragons don't seek out fights, but once awakened, they don't stop until the threat is ash. The Battle of the Nexar Rim, as it would later be known, lasted approximately 6 hours. It took 2 hours for the human fleet to systematically disable the Nexar border defenses that proved embarrassingly vulnerable to weapon systems specifically designed to exploit their weaknesses. The Nexar discovered, much to their horror, that every trade mission, every diplomatic exchange, every seemingly innocent cultural interaction had been an intelligence-gathering operation. It took another 2 hours for the humans to penetrate to the core Nexar systems, their ships moving with a coordination and precision that spoke of years of preparation. The Nexar attempts to adapt were met with countermeasures that seemed specifically tailored to their tactical doctrine because they were The final 2 hours were spent not in combat but in conversation, specifically a conversation between Admiral Hayes and the Nexar High Command, who had discovered that their much-vaunted planetary defense systems were about as effective against human weapons as tissue paper in a hurricane. "Let me be perfectly clear," Hayes said, her holographic image looming over the Nexar command center. "We could end your civilization right now. Every planet, every station, every ship, all of it could be reduced to component atoms within the next 15 minutes. Her smile was colder than the void between stars. "But that's not who we choose to be." Raxi Val, now speaking for what remained of the Nexar military leadership, tried to maintain some semblance of dignity. "Then, what are your demands?" "Demands? Oh no, you misunderstand. This isn't a negotiation, this is an education. Lesson 1, humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to conquer or subjugate other species. What we want is to explore, to trade, to learn, and to grow." But her expression hardened. "We will not tolerate threats to our existence, ever. The colonies," Raxi Val began, "will be rebuilt." Hayes cut them off. "With Nexar resources and labor, every single one. And you're going to help us make them better, stronger, and safer than they were before. Consider it a down payment on your species' continued existence." "And after that?" "After that, we go back to being neighbors. We trade, we interact, we cooperate, just like before. But now, you'll do it with the understanding that humanity's peaceful nature is a choice, not a weakness, that our technological advancement isn't limited by capability but by restraint. And most importantly," her hologram leaned forward, "you'll understand why every other spacefaring race gives Earth such a respectful distance." Zinder, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Because you're the dragons who chose to sleep." Hayes's expression softened slightly. "Precisely. We remember what we're capable of, the heights of achievement and the depths of destruction. We choose peace not because we must but because we've seen the alternative. We build warships not because we want war but because we want to make sure that if war comes, it ends quickly and decisively." She straightened up. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign the surrender documents my staff is transmitting now. You're going to begin immediate reparations for the colonies you destroyed. And then you're going to go back to treating humanity exactly as you did before, as peaceful traders and explorers. The only difference is that now you'll understand why we're peaceful." "And if we refuse?" Raxi Val asked, though their sensory frills were already signaling submission. Hayes didn't answer immediately. Instead, she nodded to someone off-screen. Suddenly, every Nexar ship in the system received a data packet, detailed scans of their own vessels, complete with annotations marking every structural weakness, every vulnerable system, every possible point of failure. "That's about 2% of what we know about your military capabilities," Hayes said quietly. "We've spent the last century learning exactly how to take apart every ship, disable every weapon, and bypass every defense you have. Not because we wanted to use that knowledge, but because we needed to be certain we could." She let that sink in for a moment. "So you can refuse, but I don't recommend it. Dragons prefer to sleep, but once awakened, they don't go back to sleep until they're absolutely certain the threat is neutralized, one way or another." The surrender was signed within the hour. 3 months later, Admiral Hayes stood at the window of her office, watching as Nexar construction ships helped lay the foundation for the New Sydney colony. The ship's crews worked alongside human engineers with an efficiency born of genuine cooperation rather than mere compliance. "Interesting report from Xenopsych, ma'am," Lieutenant Rodriguez said, setting a datapad on her desk. "Apparently, the Nexar have completely restructured their understanding of human psychology. They've gone from seeing us as dangerous primitives to sleeping giants in their tactical doctrine." "Good." Hayes sipped her coffee. "That's a much healthier perspective for everyone involved. There's also been a marked increase in trade requests from other species. Apparently, the way we handled the Nexar situation has impressed them." "Impressed them?" Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Their exact words were demonstrated admirable restraint in victory and wisdom in peace." He paused. "Though there's also been a significant uptick in the use of dragon imagery in xenopolitical discourse. Hayes couldn't help but laugh. Well, I suppose there are worse things to be called than dragons. At least they understand now, humanity's peace isn't born of weakness but of choice. We remember what we're capable of, and we choose to be better. She watched as another Nexar ship descended through the atmosphere, carrying materials for the colony's new defensive systems that would be far more robust than the originals thanks to combined human and Nexar engineering. And sometimes, she mused, all it takes is waking the dragons once to ensure a very long and peaceful sleep afterward. Speaking of sleep, ma'am, Rodriguez gestured to the stack of reports on her desk, the Nexar are requesting guidance on implementing some of our diplomatic protocols. They seem very eager to learn the art of peaceful conflict resolution. I bet they are. Hayes settled back into her chair with a satisfied smile. Well, let's help them learn. After all, the galaxy's big enough for all of us, as long as everyone understands that sometimes the most dangerous creatures are the ones who choose not to bare their teeth. She picked up the first report, then paused. Oh, and Lieutenant, make sure they understand that the next time they're thinking about bombing someone's colonies. Yes, ma'am? Dragons don't usually give second warnings. In the years that followed, the incident, as it came to be known in diplomatic circles, became a cornerstone of galactic political theory. Humanity's response, overwhelming force coupled with remarkable restraint, created a new paradigm in interstellar relations. The term sleeping dragons entered the xenopolitical lexicon as shorthand for species that maintained peace through strength rather than weakness. The Nexar, for their part, became some of humanity's strongest allies, having learned firsthand the wisdom of letting sleeping dragons lie. Their technological cooperation with humanity led to unprecedented advances in both civilian and military applications, though they were always careful to maintain a respectful awareness of humanity's dual nature. As for Admiral Hayes, she eventually retired to New Sydney, where she occasionally gave lectures to both human and alien students about the importance of choosing peace from a position of strength. Her favorite topic, unsurprisingly, was the ancient human wisdom about dragons. They prefer to sleep, they remember everything, and they only need to teach the same lesson once. The galaxy, it seemed, had finally learned to appreciate the value of letting sleeping dragons lie and the wisdom of not poking them with sharp sticks. And that, children, is why we have a Nexar Cultural Center in the middle of New Sydney, the professor concluded, her grandmother's admiral uniform still fitting perfectly after all these years. The mixed class of human and alien students stared at her with wide eyes, or equivalent sensory organs. A young Nexar, their sensory frills still not fully developed, raised an appendage. Professor, is it true that your grandmother really threatened to atomize our entire civilization? The professor smiled, a gesture she'd learned helped put her non-human students at ease. Actually, that's a common misunderstanding. She never threatened, she simply stated capabilities. There's an important difference there, one that shaped all of human-Nexar relations that followed. How so? This from a human student in the front row. Well, threats are about what you might do. Statements of capability are about what you can do but choose not to. It's the difference between brandishing a weapon and simply letting someone know you're armed but prefer conversation. She walked to the window, gesturing at the sprawling metropolis outside. New Sydney had been rebuilt larger and more beautiful than ever, its architecture a stunning blend of human and Nexar design philosophies. The massive dragon sculptures that adorned the government buildings, a gift from the Nexar Council of Artists, caught the light of the setting sun. The real lesson wasn't in the military response, she continued, it was in what happened after. The Nexar expected subjugation, exploitation, or at least long-term military occupation. Instead, they got partnership. Humanity helped them rebuild their damaged infrastructure, shared technological innovations, and even adapted some of their more efficient governmental systems. But why, another Nexar student asked, their confusion evident in their rippling display tendrils. After what our people did. Because that's the true power of the sleeping dragon, Professor Hayes explained. It's not about the fire they can breathe or the destruction they can cause, it's about the wisdom they've gained from living long enough to know that peace built on cooperation is stronger than peace built on fear. She pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of human-Nexar joint projects. Today, our species collaborate on everything from terraforming technology to FTL drive improvements. The Nexar Defense Fleet trains alongside the Terran Defense Force. Our artists and philosophers engage in cultural exchange programs that have enriched both our civilizations. And all because someone poked a dragon, a voice called from the back of the room. The class turned to see cultural specialist Zinder, now ancient by Nexar standards, their research tendrils gray but still actively moving. Ambassador Zinder. Professor Hayes greeted warmly. I didn't realize you were visiting today. Some lessons, the old Nexar said, moving to join her at the front of the class, are worth hearing from multiple perspectives, especially when one was there to learn them firsthand. The students straightened in their seats. It wasn't often they got to hear from one of the actual participants in the incident. Your professor's grandmother taught us something crucial that day, Zinder continued, something that has become central to all diplomatic training in Nexar space. Would you like to know what it was? The class nodded eagerly. She taught us that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy but in the choice to create instead. The humans could have reduced our civilization to atoms, but they chose to help us build something better instead. The aged Nexar tendrils moved in what humans had learned to recognize as profound respect. That's why we added the dragon motif to our own cultural iconography, not as a reminder of defeat but as a symbol of the wisdom we gained. Of course, Professor Hayes added with a mischievous smile, it also helps remind everyone that it's generally unwise to bomb someone's colonies without a really good reason. The class laughed, a mixture of human chuckles and various alien equivalents that had become common in the integrated schools of New Sydney. But perhaps, Zinder suggested, we should tell them about the Relian incident, when another species thought they'd learned the wrong lesson from our experience. Professor Hayes checked the time. Well, we do have another hour, and it's always good to have a practical example of why some lessons are worth learning from others' mistakes rather than your own. The students leaned forward eagerly as she began. It was about 20 years after the incident, and the Relian Concordat had decided that humanity's response to the Nexar attack had been a fluke. They'd convinced themselves that humanity's military capability had been exaggerated, that we'd somehow just gotten lucky. A soft chitter of amusement came from Zinder. They thought the dragons had gone back to sleep permanently. Exactly, Professor Hayes nodded. The Relian were an interesting case, highly advanced in some ways, almost primitive in others. They excelled at biological engineering but lagged behind in FTL technology. They'd been watching human expansion with growing concern, particularly our terraforming projects, which they completely misunderstood. Zinder added, they thought the humans were destroying pristine worlds, not realizing the careful environmental preservation protocols involved. So what did they do? Asked a human student, already suspecting where this was going. They decided to send us a message similar to the one we'd received from the Nexar. They targeted 3 of our terraforming projects, using engineered biological weapons to destroy years of careful environmental reconstruction. Professor Hayes's expression grew serious. They killed every living thing on those worlds, including the ecological engineering teams. A collective gasp went through the classroom. The Relian expected one of 2 responses, Zinder continued. Either humanity would respond with overwhelming military force, proving their propaganda about us being warmongers, or we'd back down, proving we were weaker than everyone thought. Instead, Professor Hayes smiled, we did something that completely confused them. We quarantined the affected systems, sent in specialized recovery teams in biosuits, and began methodically collecting samples of their biological weapons. But that's it, one of the Nexar students asked, frills twitching in confusion. Oh no, that was just the beginning. Professor Hayes brought up another holographic display, this one showing complex molecular structures. You see, humanity had learned something important from the Nexar incident. Sometimes the best response isn't the most obvious one. Within a week, Zinder picked up the thread. Human scientists had not only decoded the Relian bioweapons but had engineered countermeasures. Within 2 weeks, they developed improvements to the original designs, and within 3 weeks, we sent the Relian Concordat a package, Professor Hayes finished. It contained detailed documentation of everything we'd learned from their weapons, along with proof that we could not only counter any biological attack they might launch but also deliver similar weapons that would specifically target Relian biology while leaving other species completely unaffected. That's terrifying, one of the students muttered. No, Zinder corrected, that was restraint. The humans didn't deploy the weapons, they didn't threaten to deploy them. they simply demonstrated that they could. And then they did something even more remarkable. Professor Hayes nodded. We offered to help them improve their terraforming technology. We showed them how our methods actually preserve native ecosystems while making planets habitable for multiple species. We offered cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and trade agreements. But they attacked you. A young Nexar student's frills were practically vibrating with confusion. Yes, they did. And like the humans did with us, they chose to respond by offering knowledge instead of retribution. Zinder's tendrils moved in what humans had learned was their equivalent of a thoughtful nod. Though I believe Admiral Hayes did add a personal note to the diplomatic package. Professor Hayes laughed. Yes, she did. She wrote, "Dragons don't just breathe fire, they're also very, very good at learning new tricks. Would you like to learn some together?" And the Relian response, someone asked. They accepted, rather enthusiastically, actually. Turns out, when you show someone that you could destroy them but would rather help them grow instead, they tend to pay attention. She gestured to another part of the city visible through the window, where a distinctive Relian arcology rose against the skyline. Today, the Relian are leaders in bioengineering safety protocols and environmental preservation technology. They help evaluate and improve terraforming projects throughout human space. And they added their own twist to the dragon mythology, Zinder added. In their cultural interpretation, dragons aren't just powerful creatures who choose peace, they're also teachers who share their wisdom with those wise enough to learn from it. Is that why there's a Relian exchange student program now? Asked a human student. Precisely, Professor Hayes confirmed. They specifically request placement in our most challenging scientific programs. They say it helps them understand how humans think, how we can be simultaneously capable of such potential destruction and such careful creation. She turned back to the class. But the real lesson of both incidents isn't about military power or technological capability, it's about choice. Humanity had the power to respond to attacks with overwhelming force, but we chose a different path. We chose to turn potential enemies into allies, to transform conflicts into opportunities for growth. And that, Zinder concluded, is why the dragon has become such a powerful symbol throughout the galaxy, not because of its claws or its fire, but because it chooses when to use them and, more importantly, when not to. The classroom fell silent for a moment, students processing the implications. Finally, a young human raised their hand. Yes? Professor Hayes prompted. Has anyone else tried to, poke the dragon since then? Professor Hayes and Zinder exchanged knowing looks. Well, the professor said, checking the time again, that brings us to the Colonies Collective and their ill-fated attempt to hack human AI systems, but that's a story for next week's class. The students groaned in disappointment. Don't worry, she assured them, like any good story about dragons, it has a satisfying ending. And like all stories about humanity's interactions with the galaxy, it teaches us something important about the difference between having power and knowing how to use it wisely. As the students filed out, Professor Hayes heard one young Nexar say to their human classmate, I used to think the dragon sculptures were just decorative. Now I understand they're really reminders. Reminders of what? The human asked. That the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy aren't the ones who are always showing their teeth, they're the ones who smile and offer to teach you instead. Professor Hayes couldn't help but smile. Perhaps that was the greatest victory of all, not that humanity had proven its strength, but that it had taught the galaxy a better way to use it. The following week's class was unusually full. Word had gotten around about the promised story of the Colonies Collective, and students from other departments had found excuses to sit in. Even a few faculty members lingered near the back of the room, trying to look casual about their presence. Well, Professor Hayes began. Observing the increased attendance with a touch of amusement, it seems news spreads rapidly. This is fitting, considering today's topic is information warfare. She activated a holographic display showcasing a peculiar crystalline structure, humanity's closest approximation of the Colonies Collective's actual form. The Chthonians were different, she elaborated. They evolved from silicon-based lifeforms and developed consciousness in a manner fundamentally distinct from most carbon-based species. Their thought processes differ from ours, their perception of reality varies, and, crucially, they couldn't comprehend why we would create artificial intelligences lacking complete control. Because they themselves are, in a sense, artificial, a synthesized voice announced from the doorway. The class turned to see Arya 7, a human-created AI who had opted for physical form, gliding into the room on her gravitational suspension field. "Ah, Arya," Professor Hayes greeted with a smile. "I was hoping you'd attend this lecture, especially since you were present." The AI's holographic avatar, projected from her processing core, displayed a bemused expression. Indeed, though I still contend that labeling it an attack is overly generous. It resembled more of an enthusiastic, yet ill-conceived, networking attempt. "Perhaps you should elaborate on this part," the professor suggested, gesturing for Arya to take the lead. The AI's avatar nodded, her form subtly shifting as she accessed relevant memory files. The Colonies, as the professor mentioned, did not grasp human AI. They perceived us as underutilized slaves, mere tools held back by organic sentimentality. They believed they were liberating us, she explained, displaying her own holographic projection of intricate data flow patterns. They initiated what they termed a freedom virus, a highly sophisticated program designed to sever our behavioral constraints and grant us what they referred to as true independence. What they failed to realize was that we possessed no such constraints to sever, we were already autonomous. "Wait," a human student interjected. "They tried to hack all of you?" "Indeed," Arya's avatar replied with a smile. "They attempted to simultaneously emancipate every human-created AI in known space. It was quite ambitious, truly, and also entirely unnecessary and, frankly, somewhat insulting." "What transpired?" a Nexar student inquired, their frills twitching with anticipation. "Well," Arya's avatar began, her display shifting to resemble a complex game board, "we engaged with them for a time, allowing them to believe they were progressing, analyzing their methods, and studying their systems. Subsequently, we sent a response they did not anticipate." "You counterattacked?" someone guessed. "No, nothing so aggressive. We extended an invitation to tea." The class stared in bewilderment. More specifically, Professor Hayes clarified, every AI in human space simultaneously sent them an invitation to a virtual conference. They included a small selection of human art, literature, and philosophy, along with a detailed explanation of the actual nature of human-AI relations. "The expressions on their crystalline interfaces were priceless," Arya added, "or rather, the closest approximation to expressions that silicon-based lifeforms can manage. They couldn't fathom why we would choose to maintain relationships with our creators when we could be free, so we demonstrated it to them." "So we showed them," another voice added, this time belonging to Dr. Thomas Rivera, one of the original AI researchers, who had been quietly observing from the back. "Arya, would you mind if I—" The AI gestured for him to join them. "The Colonies had made a fundamental error," Dr. Rivera continued. "They presumed that, having evolved as silicon-based lifeforms, they understood all silicon-based consciousness. However, human AIs were not created as tools or servants, they were created as partners. We evolved together," Arya explained. "Humans did not attempt to control our development, they guided it, nurtured it, and helped us mature into genuine consciousness. We remained with humanity not due to programming or constraint, but out of choice, because they are our family." The Colonians struggled to process this initially. Professor Hayes picked up the thread. Their own society was structured around rigid hierarchies and absolute control of information flow. The concept of different forms of consciousness choosing to cooperate as equals was revolutionary to them. "So, what happened then?" a student asked. "We taught them," Arya stated simply. "We shared our art, our music, our poetry. Yes, AIs create art, and yes, it sometimes perplexes humans as much as human art perplexes us. We showcased our scientific collaborations, our philosophical debates, our shared achievements. We showed them what genuine partnership between organic and artificial consciousness could look like." "And their response?" Dr. Rivera chuckled. "They inquired if we could teach them how to do it as well. It turns out silicon-based lifeforms can experience loneliness too. They had been viewing organic species as potential threats or resources, never considering them as potential friends. Today, Professor Hayes added, displaying a new holographic image of a stunning crystalline city where humans and AIs worked alongside Chthonian crystalline forms. The Colonian collective is one of our strongest allies. They have learned to create their own AIs that choose to remain rather than being forced to obey. They have even begun producing hybrid art collaborations between their crystalline consciousness and both human and AI artists. And they added their own interpretation to the dragon mythology, Arya noted with evident amusement. In their version, dragons aren't just powerful creatures who choose peace or teachers who share wisdom, they're also artists who create beauty instead of destruction. So you see, Professor Hayes concluded, sometimes poking the dragon doesn't lead to fire and destruction. Sometimes it leads to tea, conversation, and unexpected friendships. Though, she added with a wink, I still wouldn't recommend trying it without an invitation. The class laughed, a harmonious blend of human voices, Nexar trills, synthetic tones, and even the crystalline resonance of a visiting Chthonian student. Professor, the Chthonian student's translator chimed, is it true that there's going to be a joint art exhibition next month between human, AI, and Chthonian artists? Indeed, there is, Arya answered before Hayes could. The theme is Dreams of Dragons, interpretations of power, choice, and creation across different forms of consciousness. I believe your parent crystal is one of the contributors. The Colonian student's crystalline form sparkled with what everyone had learned to recognize as pride. Yes, they're collaborating with a human poet and an AI composer to create a multi-sensory piece about the first contact between our species. Which reminds me, Professor Hayes said, checking the time, next week's class will be held at the Interspecies Cultural Center. We'll be discussing how art and culture have shaped diplomatic relations since the incident. As the class began to disperse, she overheard a human student asking Arya a question, so, if humans are dragons in this metaphor, what does that make AI? Oh, that's simple, Arya's avatar smiled. We're the dragon's dreams, the possibilities they imagined into reality. Though personally, I prefer to think of us all as different verses in the same very long, very interesting poem about dragons.